I come from Puerto Rico. I'm 20, and I'm a student right now at the Universidad de Puerto Rico, in Mayagüez. That's at the west side. I came here first time at a blockchain summit, and I was invited by Puerto Rico One's team, along with Jose Ortiz, and right there. And our interest right now is making sure we can utilize the blockchain so it really blends into our culture, and make sure it's one of the industries that our future students or future citizens could take advantage of, right? I think.
My name is Tyrene Wright. I'm a professor, author. My area is pretty much looking at sustainability and independence movements and the history of political independence in Africa. But primarily in reference to this panel is going to be about sustainability and how sustainability models will support reparations, internal reparations for us. What else? Producer. I also produce a radio show and a couple other things.
I'm Karen Mason. I'm an educator new to the blockchain technology, and I'm a coordinator of a career and technology education program department in Brooklyn.
I'm Sudi West. I'm the executive director of the Shaw Community Center right here in the neighborhood next to Howard, and I'm a member of the Appeal Federal Credit Union, which Baba Kalechi will speak to a little bit more. But in the spirit of bringing a little bit of energy back to the forum, I'm going to ask all of you a trick question. And the question is also a greeting. Abari Gani. So I heard a variety of different answers to that question. But in the tradition, I've been raised here in the DC community. The answers that I would probably give are Kuchi Chakalia and Ujima, which mean self-determination and cooperative economics.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Kalechi Agwem. I'm the Executive Director of Appeal Incorporated. Appeal is an organization whose mission is to organize and strategically utilize the vast resources of people of African descent, locally, nationally, and internationally, in order to produce and sustain prosperous, beneficial, and successful communities. We have several platforms to that end. Part of it is education. We do financial literacy, including on Bitcoin and blockchain, as well as basic things from budgeting to estate planning to transfer of wealth from generation to the other. We partner with black manufacturers of everyday products that black people use, everything from your detergent to your paper towels to your honey to your bar soap, deodorant. Black people make all these things, and most of us don't know that they make them, and we don't have access to them. So we act as a clearinghouse, if you will, a network, a place you can go and get all these things during the Black Saturday Co-op, which happens on Saturday. If you all are here on Saturday at 2015 Bunker Hill Road, Northeast in DC, the Umoja House, we have these products of black manufacturers. We also have a cultural historical literacy, because it's important for our people to understand the context of money and the context of our relationship with money and what history teaches us about it. And it gives us really a grounding as to where we are right now and how we got here. We didn't just drop out of the sky and appear where we are. There's a context to it. It's important to understand that history and the culture of money. I was reading an article very recently that talked about there's a Ethiopian, the oldest human skull was found in Ethiopia, and it's 10,000 years old. There's a boat, a canoe actually, that was just recently discovered in Nigeria that's 8,000 years old. We don't know how old we are. We don't know this history goes back ancient times, and we've forgotten more than we know. We have forgotten more than we know. If we're not connected to that history, we're bound to repeat the most negative parts of that history. If we're not learning from our mistakes, if we're not learning from our ancestors, we'll keep reinventing the wheel and going around in circles and wondering why we're not progressing, when in reality, we've been here before. We've done this many, many times. We civilized the world, and now we look to the world to civilize us, right? We have the parents asking the children to teach them. That's what's going on. So for us, that historical context is very, very important. We also have a think tank, the Lasana K. Mac think tank, and one of our platforms is also the founding of a national black community credit union. We've been working on that for some time. We've made a lot of progress in that. As a matter of fact, some of you all may have gotten the flyers. 30th of September at the Howard Theater, historic Howard Theater right here. We're having a fundraiser for that, because if you're gonna talk about entrepreneurship, if you're gonna talk about supporting black thinkers, whether it's a blockchain or anything else, if you're gonna talk about funding the things that we know we need, we have to have the capital to do that. We know we have the collective capital to do that, but that capital is not yet collective, right? It's not working to our benefit. So one of our primary missions is to actually organize that capital so it can be beneficial. Sorry for being a little long with my introduction.
Thank you. So we'll have Dr. Tareen just give a brief presentation for 3 minutes only.
Yeah, okay. So just to build on the conversation as to reparations, any reparations that we would get, black people, African people would get, would be in the form of internal reparations, also called, producing sustainability models. So I just want to like the brother said, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to access our historical knowledge. So I'm just going to give you a brief presentation of a sustainability model, or models of sustainability, and the concept of independence through industry that we can use technology to support, right? So an old model is the Tuskegee model of sustainability that Washington in particular, now forget everything you think you know about Booker T. Washington, scrap that. This is something else. Behind the scenes, what was going on at Tuskegee was that there was the exportation of a model of sustainability, right? And Tuskegee in and of itself was an industrial community. You see the little quote there. There's a couple of them, but the larger one you can see, it says, a school. Tuskegee is not a school in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a city in itself, a community that dominates a whole county. It's a great industrial plant that's supposed to be, with 40 trades and industries, that consumes all its own products, that erects its own buildings, first making its own bricks, that grows its own food, makes its own clothes, writes and prints its own textbooks, all by way of education. And that was Arthur Evans. That was his observation of Tuskegee that he wrote in the paper, the Chicago Record Herald, back in 1912. Nonetheless, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of a chapter in the book that I wrote on Washington in Africa, which looks at two specific cases of Washington that would establish him as a Pan-Africanist, but nonetheless, the emphasis is on the models, because these models produce something for us that are accessible today, right, in terms of international interactions and sustainability, and what one can do with them now, but what Washington did with it, which was to export it to the continent of Africa. Okay, and I talk about how he does this. How does he export the Tuskegee model once he perfects it? So essentially, I mean, I'm going to skip all of this, but the concept is that what industries existed there at Tuskegee and were what were the industries that he was seeking to reproduce abroad. So you see here, essentially, this is a tailoring industry. This is this is actually something else, but nonetheless, this is a course on mental philosophy. We don't have that anymore. But also, too, what was going on at Tuskegee was that it wasn't an industrial school. It was a school for teachers that taught teachers how to, one, teach the academics, but also, two, to master two industries and teach other people how to teach masteries of those industries. So you got the theoretical side, but then there was also the practical side. So it says at the bottom there, an academic class, a problem in brick masonry, right? So it's just not the practice. Mr. Washington always insisted upon correlation, that is drawing the problem from the various shops and laboratories. So you needed not only to be able to practice, but you needed to be able to understand the theory so that you could teach the practice, right? So exporting Tuskegee through his U.S. students, international students, well, exporting Tuskegee through Tuskegee graduates, international students, and international mentees. So there's models of Tuskegee. This is an example of the model of the students represented at Tuskegee from the African world at around 1908. Okay, so I only have 3 minutes. The concept essentially that emerges is independence through industry. There can be no liberty without intelligence, no independence without industry, and no power for man and charm for woman without character, was one of the Tuskegee philosophies. The model of Tuskegee is exported to Liberia, Togo, South Africa, and actually the Sudan, okay? He does this also through his many African nationalist affiliates, which are in Togo, right, in 1901. In 1904, he's up to something a little bit different. He's denouncing the atrocities in the Congo. But like we said, modern technology could be used to address issues of social justice, okay? But he propagandizes against the Congo Free State, and he lobbies here against that. I want to show you a couple more. Okay, so here's on the continent. He's involved with a couple of African nationalists who reproduce the Tuskegee model in South Africa. So Dube, and they're early members of the ANC. Semi in South Africa also, Casely Hayford of Ghana, Deuce Muhammad Ali, originally of Egypt, but settles in Nigeria, distributor of the Negro World, but also the African Times and Orient Review. And so in 1912, Washington does something that's interesting, something like what we're doing now. He takes the 44 industries at Tuskegee and puts them on display and opens it up to the African world. And so you have all these people, even Casely Hayford, who come and observe the 44 industries and take this. I think I have an image of it, authentic image of it. No, that's not it. But anyway, that's another case. But nonetheless, there is an actual conference where Casely Hayford and others actually attend, and it's in 1912, where those industries are opened up, and the concept was for them to take something from that and carry it back to the African world. So I'm going to stop right there. This is, if you want to know more about this particular work, where are we? I got to look up here. So this is a book, right? So this is the book, Booker T. Washington, Africa, The Making of a Pan-Africanist. What you can do with this modern technology in the modern context, one of the cases in here that I cover is the Liberian crisis, but also the Congo Free State and the African exclusion measure, which deals with the diaspora. If maybe on a later panel, I'll talk a little bit about that, but that's just an introduction to it. If you're interested, you can go to the website here. You can order the book, all that good stuff. But
thank you. So that was great. So my question for the panel, and perhaps we'll start with Timothy to give us the Puerto Rican experience, is how do you think this technology, blockchain in particular, can be used to, restore equity or equitable situations within your community? And is reparations really a model that you think will work, considering also what you've been seeing with the sort of crypto millionaires and billionaires sort of invading Puerto Rico?
I think we could focus more on the reparation side of Puerto Rico, because we have kind of an outdated infrastructure in some points and some others, and these blockchain companies, they need this update. They need the supplies, and they could update Puerto Rico. Like before the hurricane, we didn't have a mesh net, but now we have a blockchain company called Dapley, who is working on providing a mesh net in Puerto Rico, so they could help like repair our infrastructure in a way. Did I get your question? Okay, so that's like one of the ways it could really help us. It's just using these companies to provide an update to many infrastructure inside of Puerto Rico.
And what role do Puerto Ricans have? Because you're seeing foreigners sort of trying to take up the role of the local community. So is that an issue?
Could you say that again, sir?
You're seeing foreigners taking up the role of the local people in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, a lot of foreigners are coming in because most of them know the blockchain, how it works, and where it started up. So I'm a student, so my responsibility should be to find out how they work, where they work, and how could that be applied to future students such as myself. So basically that, it's really just an exchange of information which we had to capture from these foreigners. Yeah, I mean, foreigners might be a tough word, but investors, I guess. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Different models for reparation?
Wait, can I clarify? I use both terms, foreigners, investors. In Puerto Rico, it's becoming a crypto hub, right? And it's not just Americans that are coming in, right? So I've met Indian people who come into Puerto Rico and they're interested on the crypto hub that's being constructed there, as well as Puerto Ricans ourselves. I myself am one.
Can you restate the question?
So the question was, what models are there using blockchain technology to allow for reparation or restoration of equity within black communities?
Well, I think actually Sinclair's actual model with Bitcoin in Zimbabwe is actually a very good example, right? So it allows people to support agriculturalists, women, particular farmers there, and we're able to access them through the West. So, but it brings us closer. We're part of the African world, so we can directly support. It cuts out, the concept is just simply to cut out the middle person. And then in terms of reparations, any reparations that we get in the Western world, we must understand that it's going to come from us. There's not going to be reparations from the French, the British, the U.S., or to African people. They may give reparations to other groups of people, and we know that, right? So we know that the Japanese, and we know that Germany gave the Holocaust survivors reparations, but that will not happen because in America, you're talking about the wealth of this country, right? Directly built off of the labor of African people and bodies. So that will never happen here, right? Period. So internal reparations is where we would have to go, and internal reparations could be a method of cutting out no one else but us benefiting from our economic interaction, right?
I was going to say that it's not just.
And when I say us, I mean African people.
It's not just Zimbabwe, but that is a great example. But also in Kenya and a few other places, Africa is uniquely placed to be a place with the lowest threshold of difficulty in terms of blockchain technology functioning as currency. You're talking about hard money. Where is the money softer than on the African continent? I mean, you see such drastic fluctuations of value that you actually have an incentive without any other ideology, an incentive for hard money, for folks to be able to use hard money on the continent electronically. I mean, almost everybody on the continent has a smartphone. I mean, it may not seem like it, but if you travel the continent, trust me, they got 2 or 3 of them, right? People have connection to the internet. So people are, there are already businesses, many of them European businesses, that have already gone into the continent and found ways to generate digital currency. They're not necessarily blockchain technology, but there's a door open there. There's actually a very unique opportunity to maximize blockchain on the continent versus anywhere else. Right. And considering that's where the resources are, talking about cutting out these multinational corporations that are currently controlling that power, if we focus our energy on getting blockchain technology maximized so that you have access to it, we're talking about a practical use of blockchain as opposed to, the ideology of it, right? Everyday people, those farmers, going to the stores, people paying their electric bills, their phone bills. I mean, it's going on right now, not with blockchain technology, but with digital currency on the continent now. Blockchain can easily plug into that, but right now we haven't started thinking that way because we're not thinking Pan-African. We just start thinking more Pan-African because there's a unique need and opportunity. You have the youngest population on the earth, on the continent, the most educated population on the earth, on the continent, the most impoverished population on the earth, impoverished not in terms of they're starving, because they're actually not starving. They sustain themselves, but they're not wealthy in the way that the West measures wealth in terms of dollar and so on and so forth, which they're not operating that way anyway. But in terms of opportunity to actually maximize the use of blockchain in a very practical, reparation-based way, self-reparations, I think we're missing an opportunity to do so on the continent.
Well, as an educator, I feel like education is a role, it plays a very important part of this because we have to widen the base. And because right now, the blockchain knowledge is kind of at a really, just like a small percentage of people. So the more I research this, I realized that in order for us to move forward as a people, we have to be visionaries and we have to be complete innovators. And that's why I'm stressing that I really feel that people need to embrace the complexity. And it may be difficult, but they have to, we have to have some type of leverage. And I feel like we have to put ourselves in a position where people are coming to us to say, please, okay, we'll give you reparations. Just give us a little bit of your innovation. And we'll be like, well, maybe. I'll give you a little. Maybe I'll give you some Bitcoins, So, but I'm saying I feel that, I don't want to put a limit on things. Like I want to see, I think we can't say impossible, like it's not going to happen, because a part of me wants to say, okay, well, these people, they don't validate us. But I feel like if we're empowered, then it's like, then we can come to the table and say, this is, if you want us to even engage with you, you have to give us reparations, for all that you've done. But I feel that it's important, as an educator and designing, how do we design this framework? What does this construct look like? And I think because we have a population of our people, intergenerational dysfunction because of the society we live in, and our children are basically suffering from, PTSD, and so many other ills. So as a teacher, you just can't teach people. You have to dissect all of the you have to heal them. You have to be part psychologist, part nurse, mother. So I think the whole setting has to be outside of this so-called traditional education framework, and has to be more personal. And so my one thing that I'm definitely pursuing is creating these type of environments. But and I just spoke to this young man here, and he says, well, in Africa, they take it, it's like in people's apartments, and I think just make it local, make it more personal, because I think I've studied the learning styles of people of color, and we are more feeling people. So I think to embrace this complexity and to really absorb this huge technology, we have to do it the way we do it and the way that we learn. And I think that that would be very effective.
Yes, I very much appreciate the messages from our teachers and educators here. I have a unique perspective that in coming to the whole idea of blockchain and Bitcoin. I'm a DC native, which is rare, from Ward 8, Anacostia. I had the opportunity of studying systems engineering at Stanford University and ran telecom startup before it was LTE. I was trying to have people to understand that. And then when Bitcoin was at 37 cents, I was trying to get all my friends to put $1,000 in it. And I didn't put any money in it because they wouldn't.
Wow.
And through that and a variety of other experiences, I've come to that perspective of self-determination, of realizing that, well, what was represented in a graphic in a earlier presentation that Jimmy had, where a person on a podium telling everyone what to do, and he's leveraged out over a cliff, and everyone's petitioning him, standing on the plank that's keeping him from falling off the cliff. Right. And so that's a very easy thing to look at when you think of things in terms of self and other, or a zero-sum game. But that intonation that I started off with, Kujichagulia, self-determination. When we're talking about reparations, we need to mind our business. We need to advantage ourselves when possible. Ourselves being whatever community or interest that you feel you can organizes you. Blockchain is a phenomenal tool for having accountability and reach in doing some of those things. So after those, career in telecom, working on Capitol Hill and what have you, I have come to now where I run a youth development center, a community center just down the street from here in the Shaw community. This is the top gentrifying zip code in America within the past 5 years, and the top business improvement district in America in that same period. This isn't a coincidence. You know, gutting one to advantage the other. So how do you advantage yourself in a situation like that? You have no money, can't live there, you know. The youth that I work with, they're born there, but there's even a rift between, say, the privilege of being a Howard student and, running into someone from the neighborhood at the carryout, right? So I've really had some practical experience and ideas. One thought I had, just very briefly, is to have a mining system that builds on our cultural assets, right? Last open-air go-go store in America is 2 blocks down the street here. So what about, but everyone, we're early adopters in this community, 8-month-olds with cell phones. The first, all these iPads and everything, it was folks that I was helping in affordable housing complexes. And then there's these cultural assets. So what about something that has mining through rhythm-based authentication? And where the blockchain offers a certain transparency and accountability in a community in which the currency is trust, and we fall more often on the mistrust part of that. So these are just some ideas, but I'm very excited about the opportunity of intersecting the cultural and technological opportunities and testing them and iterating from there.
All right, all right. So we're running short of time, so I'll only allow 2 questions. Yes.
Hi. So I wanted to know, like, what the panel thinks about this. As far as, to some extent, like, do reparations work as compliance to in the validation of a de facto government set up by invaders?
I think I understand what she's getting at. Reparations is about debt, right? It's about a debt that's owed. It doesn't really matter whether the debtor is actually going to pay that debt. I don't think any of us are under any fantasy that is a check in the mail.
No.
But it's about a debt that's owed and the importance to acknowledge that debt. At this point, we don't even have acknowledgement of the debt. And too many white Americans walk around here telling black people how we don't deserve this and that, how we feel entitled to this and that, how we are thankful that we're in this country because they have no knowledge and they haven't paid us yet. I mean, that's a basic understanding of history. You have to start from there. And then even having a conversation as to how you move forward, everybody has to be on the same page. It's revisionist history that's being pumped in the ears and the minds of the children from elementary school all the way to even Howard University right here is destructive to us. So when we start having conversations about the future, we have to have a baseline. And the baseline has to be at a minimum acknowledgement of the debt, because this country would not be anywhere near where it is now without, as a matter of fact, as I'm thinking about this, next year is the 100th anniversary of the first African to be brought to Jamestown as an enslaved person. That's 400 years of our people's blood that was used to make this country the most powerful country in the world. Yet we get no acknowledgement of that, no payment, no acknowledgement that there's even a payment due. You know, a president who I won't name can sit in a house built by African people who were not paid to build it, and talk down on African people while, you know, eating on the furniture they built under the roof they built. So there's a basic acknowledgement of the debt, you know, and it has to be the baseline for the conversation regardless of what you do. So that's really what it's about.
Not so much a question, just want to thank you for that point. About a year ago, I made a Facebook post and I said, we have to change the terminology, because if we continue to call it slavery, we'll trigger the emotional response of what slavery is. And when we call people the terminology, oh, they were a slave, we basically destroy what they are. They were a person who were stolen and their wages were stolen. And so if we look at it from the economic standpoint versus the emotional standpoint, I think it's great that you bring that out. So how would you go about changing the culture so that we look at it from the economic terms of what was taken and, you know, remove the emotional, I mean, not to say that the emotions aren't valid, but to look at the cost and look at the value of what was taken versus the emotional that we get caught up on.
Right, I think it's in talking to each other. It's in education. You know, we haven't been the ones telling the story, right? So the story hasn't been told from our point of view. We need to tell the story to ourselves, and because we're actually in the best position to tell the story, but because we haven't even refuted the story that we're being told, everybody's believing their story they're being told. Once we start telling the story more and louder and pervasively, not just on this side of the Atlantic, because the story needs to be told on the other side of the Atlantic as well. That's a whole other conversation, right? But, you know, until what do you say about the hunter telling the story, right?
The hunter's always the hero,
right?
Until the lion tells the story.
Exactly, right? So we need to start telling the story, you know, and once we start doing that, then the right context, because there's, well, I mean, I'm not going to talk too long, but there's so much we don't know about the story. The story of the enslavement of African people, the imprisonment of African people, is actually the story of resistance to it on both sides of the continent. I mean, you know, the reason why this country was forced to let go of slavery, was to recognize that it could not continue this, is because there were revolts going on every single week. Folks were getting their heads cut off. That's what was happening. So it wasn't oh wow, we feel bad, it's time to end this. But that's what's being told, right? This revision, they're not even they're beginning to not even acknowledge that this was a forcible oppression of a people. You start hearing folks using words like choice, right? You know, so we're getting even more and more confused in the scenario because we're not the ones telling the story. We need to tell the story louder and more pervasively throughout.
To right.
Right. So just to advance that position, you're looking at its enslavement, but also at the same time, slavery is a condition that no group of people on this earth have not experienced at some point in time, usually at the hands of their own people, right? And literally the word slave, New York Historical Society did a great exhibition on this particular point, and they started slavery in New York. It happened here. And the first installment had the word slave, which originated when the Western Europeans enslaved Eastern Europeans, the Slavic nations, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, you know, all of those Eastern Europeans, right, and plural slaves. So anyway, the point is that to the economic end, also defining the conversation on our end is important, but defining it on their end is important. You're talking about the underbelly of British society coming here, the peasant class, because the aristocracy does not come to America, right? So the peasant class, for the first time, leaving a society where they engaged in serfdom, forever on the bottom, allowed to come to America, the peasant class liberates itself and become millionaires for the first time. If you look at Mississippi, the peasant class of the underbelly of British society become millionaires for the first time in the 19th century, okay, due to enslavement of African people. And so when you also, it's not just about defining our position, but also defining who they are, a people who have been perpetually condemned to poverty in their own society, right? Escape. This is why, you know, listen, I wasn't a super big fan of the film, the Black Panther, but what it did for us is gave us our own ideation or our own image of our utopia. This society is founded on their utopia, them escaping their reality, of people who have been poor, who are resource poor then and now, right? But have managed to learn how to exploit the rest of the world to their benefit. I mean, some of the poorest, they are the poor people on this earth. So, I mean, we're on U.S. history, my students at Medgar Evers this semester, and I teach it just that way. Who are these people? These are resource poor, you know, agriculturally poor, right? They're not producing much in terms of agriculture. They're not the agriculturalists, even though when you look at Africa now and South Africa, they want to frame the conversation as they're the agriculturalists on this earth, and that's not true. They're not at all. But in reframing who we are, we have to also reframe who they are. They are a resource-poor people. We are a resource-rich people, equatorial people around the world with the concentration in Africa. And so how do we get African people to benefit most from those resources is the conversation we want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just...